Hey, hi. So in this lecture, we are going to discuss about the REST architecture. So basically, any APIs which are following this REST architectures are called as RESTful APIs. So let's say we have an app which is trying to get the weather information, or any two applications which are trying to, communicate with each other. So REST is software architecture that imposes conditions on how an API should work. So basically it is telling that REST should any APIs which is following a set of standards or principles or constraints for sharing data between different systems. Any APIs which is following the standards are called as the RESTful APIs, or any principles. So we will discuss about those principles. So like these are the list of the principle which an RESTful API should follow. So first one, the uniform interface, client server, stateless communication, cacheable, layered system. So we'll discuss them one by one. So the first one is the uniform interface. So this is the most fundamental principle any RESTful API should follow. So to understand what is a uniform interface, so we must know first what is a resource. Okay. So whenever you're designing an application, you identify entities in your application. Okay, those entities can be a resource. Okay, resource can be person, a user, invoice, or account, anything. Okay, and all these resources can be represented in a JSON, XML, and HTML format. And the resource can be created, modified, or deleted over an HTTP protocol, and we'll come to that point later. So each resource, after identifying each resource in an application, we can identify them using an uniform resource identifier. Okay, just like in an e-commerce application, we can identify the products using this endpoints. So basically, why do we need this endpoint? Because we want some other applications to access it. So basically, we give them so we identify or design them in this way. For example, in an e-commerce application, we have products, customers, or comments. Let's say we want to access a product which is having an ID1, or any customer which is having ID1, or a comment for that matter. So we first of all identify the resource, and in secondly we also mention what is the endpoint to access that specific resource. And each resource can be represented in formats like in JSON or XML, just like here, when we in an e-commerce application we have products and all. So if somebody wants to access this information over this endpoint, it should return the data in the format which is mentioned here in this way, like a wireless headphone data which is there. So you can return the response in this specific fashion. So we have identified the resource. We have uh, described what should be endpoint resource, endpoint for that specific resource. Now how do we access that resource? So here in this example we have a client, and we have an e-commerce application. Okay, so using an HTTP protocol, on top of that we can use a get method, for example here. So this is the endpoint which has been shared by it. So once we use a get method over the HTTP protocol, the application will process that request and send back the information. Maybe this information is stored in some database and other stuff, so it will just send that response and back. So we can use this protocols, like different protocol for different specific methods. For example, here we can just use the get protocol, a get method over an HTTP protocol to just get the information, or you can use a post method to create a new resource, or a put method to update a resource, or delete here to delete any resource in the application. Okay, so this is all about uniform interface. So second one is the client server. So as the name suggests, it's pretty simple. So each of these applications are communicating with each other, and they have set up responsibilities. Like here a third party app may want to get the information from an e-commerce app. So this is a client and this is a server. So we have separations of responsibility. Okay, client sends the request to the server over the HTTP protocol. Okay, and the server here is going to handle the data, logic and processing it, probably to hit the database and get the data for you. And after processing, it's going to return the response back in the JSON, in a JSON format. Okay, between this, and also the communication between them should be stateless, which is the next point we're going to discuss. So this is pretty simple. So next principle here is statelessness. Okay, in the REST architecture, statelessness refers to communication method in which server completes all the requests independent of the previous request. Okay, so here in the e-commerce application, okay, each request is stateless and isolated from each other. Okay, the this e-commerce application is not going to show any information about the client here specific here. So whenever a client application wants to communicate, it should have all the information what it requires to communicate with the e-commerce app. Okay, so this is one of the requirement of the RESTful. This is one of the principle of the RESTful service. So next we'll discuss about the layer system. Okay, a client can connect to the any authorized intermediaries between client and server. So the communication between the client and server may not be the direct. Okay, there may be layers between them. For example, a client may send a request to the load balancer, an API gateway, or an authentication layer. So it will still receive the responses from the server. So there can be layers between client and server in this way. Similarly, we can also have a layer here between server itself can connect to different layers. For example, it may connect to a business layer for processing the logic, and it will connect to data layer to get the data back. So if you say the end-to-end communication, it is not one straightforward like between client directly communicates with the server. There can be layers between them, and also server can also have communicate with different layers to send back the response. So this is all about layered system. Now next is cacheability. Now, okay, RESTful service supports caching. So why we require caching? To so that the response time is very quick, and it reduces loads on the server, which is what it's going to do. It's a process of storing some responses on the client or an intermediary to improve the server's response time. For example, here we may trying to get a list of products. Okay, and let's say those products are high on high demand, so we may just want to store that response back instead of going back to the server. So so it may send back the cache, it may send back the header in the response, like we can mention like tells the client that the response can be cached for 3 and 6. This is the header in the response which with the server can send back. So this is all about the key principles of the REST. It is having uniform, it should have a uniform interface, and client server architecture, stateless communication between them, and the response can be cacheable, and there can be a layer system between client and server.